Hello everyone, this is Tim, and I'm going to be doing something a little bit different today. There are lots of two-page illustrations in this book, the A Game of Thrones, and I just thought they were absolutely stunning and just beautiful. So this whole video is going to be me talking while you're looking at some of the artwork from the book. And for those of you that haven't read A Song of Ice and Fire, the series by George R. R. Martin, I suggest you go check that out. They are some pretty thick books, and I don't know, there's a lot of characters in them. But I've read them probably about 4 or 5 times now, and I'm kind of desperately waiting for the next book to come out. Whenever George decides to, work out all the kinks and produce it. But it's worth checking out, and if you haven't read those books, you probably want to stop watching this video because I'm going to be going through some things that are, spoilers, and I don't want to ruin it for you. So please go check out those books if you haven't. All right, like I said, I've read through the A Song of Ice and Fire series, I think 4 or 5 times now, and I kind of fell in love with it. I've mentioned in past videos that I don't normally like human-centric games, but I think that's not necessarily because of the focus on humans, but usually on the belittling of demi-humans. But there are no demi-humans in this setting, at least not anymore. And I don't know, I really like it. I really like the way George has written his novels, and I don't know, it has a place in my heart. So when Alcov asked me to do a review of this, I was kind of excited. I knew it was a very big book, as I've showed you before, but I was looking forward to it. So without further ado, I want to go through the Game of Thrones D20 game that was put out by Guardians of Order. And I like this RPG manifesto that the book starts out with, and I'm just going to read it to you here. These rules are written on paper, not etched in stone tablets. Rules are suggested guidelines, not required edicts. If the rules don't say you can't do something, you can. There are no official answers, only official opinions. When dice conflict with the story always wins. Min-maxing and munchkinism aren't problems with the game, they're problems with the player. The game master has full discretionary power over the game. The game master always works with, not against the players. A game that is not fun is no longer a game. It's a chore, and that's very true. This book contains the answers to all things. When the above does not apply, make it up. I kind of thought that was pretty good, so I decided to read it. Okay, the first chapter is basically introducing the Game of Thrones to you. Throughout the book, the designer notes that are they look like little scrolls. They're on the side of each page whenever they're there. They're very informative and they're interesting, and they usually give optional rules, and I'm a big fan of optional rules. I'm not necessarily a fan of, this is the way that everybody has to play. I like that there's options out there, especially in a book like this that's so big that you can really customize the game to your liking. Some of the new things that are in the book and aren't canon might rub people slightly the wrong way, but I really didn't see too much of it. Mostly I think it comes down to like troop numbers and just whatever the authors felt made sense. So everything was approved by George R. R. Martin. It's just not necessarily canon. So there's kind of a distinguish there. A little bit different. It basically briefly introduces the great houses, some minor houses, the brotherhoods, and the other people outside of Westeros. That's the Seven Kingdoms where the books are mainly focused. And the great houses are Baratheon, Stark, Lannister, Arryn, Tully, Tyrell, Greyjoy, Martell, and Targaryen. The small houses that they mention are Frey and Umber, but there's other small houses later in the book. The brotherhoods that they quickly mention are the Maesters, which are like the Knights of the Mind, the people that basically know all the knowledge, the Godsworn, Night's Watch, and the Kingsguard. And the other peoples are the Dothraki and the peoples of the Free Cities. A Game of Thrones covers the first book of A Song of Ice and Fire and leaves it at that. So it basically leaves things open to allow the GM to bring in the other books if they so wish, but they don't have to. They basically can take things in a different direction. It basically summarizes in 6 pages the first book of the series, and there's the obligatory what is an RPG section and example of play, because we have to kill more trees. There's a nice history of fantasy literature and RPGs and how George R. R. Martin fits into that. If you really just want to get right into the RPG, you can skip this section, but I really enjoyed reading through it. I thought it was very educational. Chapter 2 starts up. It's basically the character creation basics, and this game has lots of chapters dedicated to character generation. I believe it's 2 through 11. I'll have to double check. But there's all these steps that they go through and basically just show you how to do things. Step 1 is a discussion between players and the GM. And you really want to talk about the campaign, which houses are available, which backgrounds and classes are allowed in the game, and basically just the general hook or the general idea of the game. You want to really get that home as far as what the game is going to be about, so players can know what kind of players or what kind of characters they can make. Step 2 is a rough character outline, and I know in campaigns past I've had a hard time getting backgrounds from certain players, and other players, give me 10 pages of stuff. So this kind of game is definitely for those people who like to have a pretty fleshed out background for their character. Step 3 is generate ability scores. Point buy is a standard, but they also suggest 4d6 and drop the lowest. Step 4 is select background, and this is mainly the region you're from and the advantages and disadvantages of the area that you grew up in. Step 5 is house affiliation, and the GM will let you know if you can choose a major house or a minor house, or if no house is the way that he's going to run his campaign. And there's different suggestions that the book gives as far as how you're doing things with that. And house affiliations can determine some of the feats that you're allowed to use, and basically the house is the prerequisite. And it also goes into social status. One of my critiques of this game is that it breaks down information about certain topics like reputation and influence points, and it kind of spreads them through the rules. So there's like 3 or 4 places that it talks about it. In a way, it's good because as you read through it, it's like, okay, here's influence points, and then later they hit you up with it again and again. So there's some repetition there, and they just get more and more involved as the book goes along. Step 6 is class. There are 8 new core classes and 8 new prestige classes. And I'm not a real big crunch guy, but when I look at these classes, they really seem to fit the setting. Whereas what you choose really has a basis in all the writing that George did. Step 7 is skills. Basically, there's some defects you can take later on that give skill points, and the game adds in skill specializations, kind of like how White Wolf does it, and they're free. And there's also these things called bonus points, which are a new reward in this game, and 1 bonus point equals 3 skill points. And remember that everyone in this game is playing a human, so they get the bonus skill points at character generation and 1 per level. Step 8 is feats. You basically get an extra. You can get extra feats from defects, or from the GM giving bonus points for a longer character background, kind of like the carrot on a stick to reward players for coming up with interesting backgrounds for themselves. And 3 bonus points equals 1 feat. So depending on how generous your GM wants to be, you could get feats, you can get skills, and it's kind of like a currency to buy things. Step 9 is assigning reputation and influence. You basically gain reputation points by class, and that's kind of a new thing in this game. Influence points are determined by house, class level, charisma modifier, and certain feats. And influence basically tells you which NPCs and organizations you have power over or you're affiliated with. And reputation is basically what you're known for, your good and bad deeds that haunt you or follow you. And step 10 is character defects, what I talked about before. These give you bonus points, and I like them because they give you interesting role-playing kind of angles to take your character in different ways. And again, 1 bonus point equals 3 skill points, or skill ranks, and 3 bonus points equals 1 feat. GMs can give bonus points to reward players that do the character outline and basically have a more fleshed out character, more information. They do a little bit more work. And now I'm just going to go through, because this is how the book does it, and they go through and break down the different steps, and they go even into more detail. So step 1, this is the discussion with your GM. You want to talk about the time frame and the campaign setup. What kind of game is the GM running? Are you running, beyond the wall? Are you down in the south? Are you in the north? Depending on where you are and what the timeline is, it can really affect how things go and the power level and style of the campaign he wants to do. And you're supposed to make suitable characters with a reason to coexist, and that's very important. There's some styles of play that isn't as important, but for the most part, you should have a reason to stick together, otherwise you're going to break to the 4 corners of the earth. There are 3 kind of styles of play. There's the noble house game, where you're all from one house, or you're bannermen for one house. So you kind of all, there's oaths and allegiances, and that's why you guys get along. And there's also the Game of Thrones, which is kind of the same name as the book, but it's the most unlike traditional role-playing. And this very much reminds me of Birthright, if you're familiar with that old setting. You basically represent characters that have different factions, opposed houses, and you kind of struggle with each other. And it's more kind of, I guess the zoom is back. You're taking a bigger angle and bigger view of things, and you're a lot more powerful. And the third style of game is called a Band of Heroes. And they're normally bound by duty, honor, oaths, poverty. You're all outcasts. You're not the movers and shakers of the world. You're basically someone tells you to do stuff. And this is probably the closest to traditional role-playing that this game gets. Some of the new rules that are in the game, and again, they kind of repeat this over and over again in more and more detail. Social status is a rating from -1, which is an outcast. You have to take a defect to get that, all the way up to 6. You have to take a lot of feats to become king, or maybe that's not even possible in your game. And you mainly get this through your house affiliation and what level you are in that house. It basically goes through and lists the resources you have and the responsibilities you have. Reputation, like I mentioned before, is gained by level. And you can have one that you put all your reputation points in, and you get those by level, kind of like any other class ability. Or you can have multiple ones. And sometimes you can have ones that conflict. You could have one like cynical, or violent, or rash. And some of those might be negative ones. Then you might have ones that are honorable, trustworthy. And sometimes if you have like +4 in a good one and a +2 in a negative one, it actually kind of breaks down to 4 - 2 is 2. So you kind of it basically gives you the opportunity to role play out of your bad ones, and even the bad ones themselves can be beneficial in certain situations. There's also influence and influence points, and those are by class and the ranking of your social status, and by feats. All right, I think I'm going to take a little break here and move on to the next video. I will see you there.